They were trained to survive war zones, but they vanished without a trace right here at home. And what the military says barely scratches the surface. You expect soldiers to face danger on the battlefield. That's part of the job. But what happens when they disappear on U.S. soil under circumstances so strange, so quietly swept away, that you can't help but ask, what aren't we being told? Today, we're diving deep into the haunting cases of 5 American soldiers who went missing without a trace right here, inside the borders of the country they swore to protect. No enemy fire, no overseas conflict, just gone. Families left in the dark, reports redacted, and the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. And while the official explanations might seem neat on the surface, we're going to pull back the curtain on the inconsistencies, the cover-ups, and the chilling possibilities that never made the evening news. Stick around until the end, because the final case? It may just change how you see the military forever. Soldier number 1, Specialist Lavena Johnson, the wrong kind of fire. Let's start with one of the most disturbing and most questioned cases. Specialist Lavena Johnson. She was 19 years old, smart, driven, patriotic, the kind of young woman who enlisted not because she had to, but because she wanted to serve. Her father, a military veteran himself, was proud, until he got the call. In July 2005, Lavena was found dead inside a military base in Balad, Iraq. Now, you're probably thinking, wait, this isn't American soil. True, but hang on. This case matters, because what happened next laid the foundation for a disturbing pattern. And Lavena's story? It's a blueprint for how the military handles things when someone goes missing or dead under suspicious circumstances. Official cause of death? Suicide. A gunshot wound to the head. But when her family received her body, they noticed something off. Her face was bruised, her nose appeared broken, her teeth were damaged. There were chemical burns on her genitals. And the bullet wound? It was on the wrong side for her dominant hand. The Army called it a self-inflicted gunshot. Her father, Dr. John Johnson, didn't buy it for a second. He requested the autopsy. He asked for the photos. He asked for answers. What he got? Redacted reports, dodged questions, a story that didn't match the physical evidence. Eventually, independent forensic analysts reviewed the case. And guess what? Their conclusion echoed the father's suspicions. Lavena's death was not consistent with suicide. The scene had been staged, evidence tampered with. Still, the Army stood by its ruling. Now, here's where it ties into our theme. If this level of silence and cover-up can happen on a well-documented base overseas, where hundreds of people were stationed, what happens when someone goes missing in the States, where there are fewer eyes and even fewer questions? That's what makes the next case even more chilling. Soldier number 2, Private First Class Shadow McClaine, the text that never came. Shadow McClaine was 25 years old, Army Intelligence Specialist, Fort Campbell, Kentucky. She loved animals. She had a complicated marriage with another soldier. And one day, in September 2016, she vanished into thin air. She was supposed to report to work. She never showed up. Her car was later found abandoned near the base. Her phone, gone. Her dog, unattended. And her apartment, untouched, like she'd just vanished mid-thought. At first, the Army treated it like a personal matter. Not AWOL, not a kidnapping, just an absence. But Shadow's mother knew something was wrong. Her daughter had sent a text just days earlier, something cryptic, like, "If something happens to me, look at my ex." That ex? A fellow soldier, who also happened to be facing disciplinary action over a history of domestic issues. The military's response? Minimal, delayed, inconclusive. It wasn't until Shadow's body was discovered months later, burned and buried in a remote rural location, that things escalated. Turns out, her ex-husband, along with another soldier, had kidnapped and murdered her. They lured her into a car, strangled her, and tried to cover it up. Now, here's the dark twist. Shadow had gone to her chain of command before. She had expressed fear, She had requested help, and she had been dismissed. Why? Because it was a domestic issue, and the military, all too often, stays out of those. The Army didn't classify her disappearance as suspicious until it was far too late. But here's what should make your blood boil. The delays, the red tape, the lack of urgency, those things weren't accidental. They're baked into the system. Because if a soldier goes missing and it reflects poorly on the institution, silence becomes policy. Shadow McClaine didn't vanish in a war zone. She vanished in Middle America. And the people who knew something was off, they were ignored until a body was found. Soldier number 3, preview tease. The third soldier on our list. He left for a run on base in broad daylight on American soil, never came back. His body was found months later in a spot that had already been searched. The official report? He must have gotten lost. But what really happened to Private Gregory Wedel-Morales? Gregory Wedel-Morales was just weeks away from finishing his service. He had plans, a wedding, a new job, a fresh start outside of the uniform. But before any of that could happen, he simply disappeared. It was August 2019, Killeen, Texas, right outside Fort Hood. Gregory had left the base for a night out. He got in his car, drove into town, and that was the last anyone saw of him. At first, nobody seemed all that concerned. He was marked as AWOL, absent without leave. In military terms, it basically means you ghosted your duty. No benefits, no urgency, no help from the Army. His family knew something didn't add up. Gregory had no history of disappearing. He wasn't reckless. He had a strong relationship with his mom, and he never missed check-ins. For him to vanish without saying a word, it didn't make sense. But still, the Army refused to classify him as missing. They didn't launch a search. They didn't notify the media. They didn't even try to ping his last known location. They stamped AWOL on his record and moved on. It took 10 months. 10 months before someone stumbled across human remains in a field in Killeen, near railroad tracks. Skeletal, buried in weeds, left like trash. Dental records confirmed it was Gregory. Suddenly, the Army shifted gears. They posthumously updated his status from AWOL to active duty missing. That one sentence changed everything. It meant his death would now be treated with some level of seriousness. It also meant he could be buried with military honors. And his family, who had spent months begging for help, were finally acknowledged. But why did it take nearly a year to find a body so close to the base? Why didn't they search the area earlier? And here's the part that makes your stomach turn. Gregory's case only got renewed attention because of another missing soldier at the same base. Because the next person to vanish from Fort Hood was Vanessa Guillen. Her story would ignite a firestorm, but it also made people look back at the forgotten soldiers like Gregory, who had quietly slipped through the cracks. Or, more accurately, had been shoved through them. Gregory's mother believes her son was murdered. And to this day, his case remains officially unsolved. There were no suspects charged, no clear motive, and no answers from the military. Just silence. That's the theme here. Not just missing soldiers, but the way their stories are buried. Not with care, not with ceremony, but with inconvenience. As if the less said, the better. And it keeps happening. Because the next soldier wasn't even off base when he disappeared. He was in his barracks. Private Devin K. Williams was 21 years old, stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Known for being quiet, respectful, kind of a loner, he wasn't the type to get into trouble, and his record was clean. He spent most of his free time reading, watching documentaries, or writing letters home. On May 14, 2021, Devin went missing. Not from a gas station, not from town, from his own base. 1 minute, he was there. The next, gone. His bed was untouched. His wallet, phone, and personal belongings, all still in his room. His last text was vague, just a "talk soon" to his sister, which sounded normal. There was no note, no signs of struggle, no indication he had left willingly or under duress. The Army told his parents that they were looking into it. But that's pretty much all they said. For weeks, there were no public updates. No press conferences, no alerts to the community. It was like he had fallen off the face of the earth, and the people responsible for finding him were barely looking. It took 31 days for the military to announce anything meaningful. And when they did, it wasn't a breakthrough. It was a discovery. Devin's body was found in the woods on the edge of the base. Initial reports said it was non-combat related. No further comment. Toxicology results were never shared publicly. Cause of death? Never confirmed to the family. Just under investigation. That was it. The Army told Devin's mother to stop asking questions, that she'd be contacted when they had something to report. They never did. His family was left with whispers and what-ifs. Was it suicide? Foul play? A hazing gone wrong? An accident? There was no closure. Just a flag-draped casket and the sound of silence. And this silence wasn't just painful, it was deliberate. Because when soldiers go missing or die mysteriously on base, it triggers something the military hates: scrutiny. And scrutiny leads to exposure. And exposure threatens image. So instead of loud, urgent investigations, you get vague statements. You get private memorials. You get officials who decline to comment because the case is ongoing even years later. And then there's the one that hits hardest, because it involves one of the most secure military installations in the country, a place you'd think was impossible to just walk away from. But he did. Or so they said. Private First Class Corey S. Williams was stationed at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington. It's a huge installation over 90,000 acres, multiple entry points, 40,000 active personnel. Basically, a small city with its own laws. Corey had been deployed before. He was mentally solid, physically fit, and had just returned from leave with family. He was excited to get back to training. There were no red flags, no disciplinary issues, no behavior changes. Then one morning in January 2022, Corey didn't show up for duty. His commanding officer assumed he overslept. Hours passed. Still no Corey. Someone went to his barracks. His door was locked. They forced it open. His bed was made. His boots were by the door. His phone and keys were on the dresser. No sign of Corey. Security footage showed him leaving the building around 4:50 a.m., walking calmly. No duffel bag, no gear, just a hoodie and sweatpants. And then nothing. No exit through the base gates. No sightings, no hits on his ID badge, no usage of his debit card. It was like he evaporated into the cold morning air. They did search parties. Dogs, drones, helicopters. For 3 weeks, nothing. Until a fisherman reported a smell near the shore of American Lake, just outside the base. Search teams found a body tangled in reeds near the waterline. It was Corey. Autopsy listed drowning, but there was no water in his lungs, no defensive wounds, no drugs. His toxicology report came back clean. And somehow, despite a full-body search of that area just days earlier, he wasn't found until now. The Army ruled it an unexplained death. The file was sealed. His family received no explanation, just a letter of condolence and a folded flag. 5 soldiers, all different backgrounds, different bases, different years. But one common thread: the truth was never clear, and the military, despite its resources, intelligence, and capabilities, either couldn't or wouldn't tell the whole story. So families were left chasing shadows, piecing together rumors, holding candlelight vigils while waiting on reports that never came. It's not just about the tragedy of their deaths. It's about the way their stories were handled or mishandled, the silence that followed, the redactions, the delays, the discomfort that came every time someone asked too many questions. And maybe you're thinking, is it really a cover-up? Or is it just bureaucracy? But when you stack the cases together, the pattern becomes hard to ignore. Disappearance, delay, discovery, denial, again and again. What's worse than losing a soldier? Losing them on your own soil and then being told not to ask why. If 1 soldier vanishes, it's a tragedy. If 5 vanish under strange and unresolved circumstances, it's a crisis. But what happens when you start asking why? Why were these deaths ruled so quickly and so conveniently as accidents or suicides without evidence that holds up under even basic scrutiny? Why were the families of these soldiers forced to become their own investigators, digging, pleading, pressuring the very institution that was supposed to protect them? Why does a system with the resources of the United States military somehow struggle to find its own missing soldiers on its own soil? Let's break that down. First, there's a very uncomfortable truth most people outside the military don't know. When a soldier goes missing off-duty or off-post, jurisdiction gets messy fast. Military police may delay action because, technically, it's considered a civilian matter. But civilian law enforcement may hesitate to get involved because it's military personnel. So for hours, sometimes days, no one takes responsibility. That's exactly what happened in Shadow McClaine's case. She vanished, and neither side stepped up. They played a jurisdictional ping-pong game while she was being murdered. And even when both sides agree, there's often a disturbing lack of urgency unless public pressure kicks in. Now, if you're wondering, well, isn't this just incompetence? Sometimes, yes. But more often, it's systemic design. Because when soldiers die mysteriously, the Army doesn't want a scandal. They want plausible deniability. They want closure, not answers. They want the press release to say tragic and isolated incident, not under investigation and multiple failures. It's reputation management. That's why families get vague statements like there were no signs of foul play when the evidence screams otherwise. It's why the Army told Lavena Johnson's parents that her injuries were consistent with a suicide, even when her face was bruised, her teeth broken, her genitals burned, and her weapon lay in a position no right-handed person would have used. It's why Vanessa Guillen's case got traction only after public outcry, and why it made people go back and ask, wait, what about Gregory? Because the military doesn't move unless forced to. Now here's the part that hits hard. This doesn't just happen in extreme or rare cases. It's not just a few names. There are dozens more stories that never made the news, names that never trended on Twitter, families that are still waiting for answers years later. In fact, Fort Hood alone, just that one base, has seen over 30 soldiers die under questionable or unexplained circumstances in less than 5 years. That's more than some police departments see in a decade. And yet, the silence continues. Because the cost of truth politically, legally, financially is too high. So the pattern repeats. Someone goes missing. Their loved ones panic. The command shrugs. Weeks pass. A body turns up. The cause is stamped as accidental or suicide, and the paperwork gets filed away while another family is handed a folded flag. Let's talk about those flags. To most people, it's a symbol of honor. But for these families, it's a symbol of unanswered questions. It's what you get instead of the truth. Instead of transparency, instead of accountability. One mother said it best. They gave me a triangle of cloth and a closed casket. That's not enough. And it shouldn't be. These are people who were willing to risk their lives for this country. They didn't expect a free ride, but they did expect the system to have their back to protect them, even at home, especially at home. But it didn't happen. They were killed by neglect, by indifference, by the slow, corrosive damage of institutions more focused on optics than outcomes. And here's the worst part. This silence becomes a second death. The first is the body. The second is the forgetting. And the military, whether deliberately or by design, makes sure the forgetting happens fast. No press coverage. No thorough investigations. No real consequences. Just silence. It's easy to think these stories are isolated tragedies. But when you line them up, you see something different. You see a system that knows how to protect its own reputation but not its people. You see the same script played out in different cities, with different faces, but the same ending. And you realize these 5 soldiers aren't just 5 stories. They're symptoms. Symptoms of a culture that treats inconvenient truths like administrative errors, something to be quietly processed, not loudly confronted. That's what this video is about. Not just the names, not just the dates, but the silence. The calculated, smothering silence that wraps itself around every soldier who disappears on American soil and dares to become an embarrassment. Because it's not just about who vanished. It's about who vanished them, and who tried to vanish the truth along with them. Corey, Devin, Gregory, Shadow, Lavena. 5 names that should have been protected. Instead, they were buried in silence twice. First under dirt, and then under paperwork. Each of their stories cracks the mirror we hold up to the military. And what we see through those cracks isn't bravery or honor. It's bureaucracy, negligence, and a chilling resistance to truth. They didn't vanish in enemy territory. They vanished in the very place that swore to shield them. And what did their families get? A knock at the door, a flag in a box, a story that never made sense. And year after year, the same explanations echo. We're investigating. We found no signs of foul play. We can't comment on an ongoing case. It's a script, cold, rehearsed, perfectly legal, and morally bankrupt. But the truth is never in those statements. It's in the silence between them. It's in the fact that these families had to become detectives, investigators, and advocates, all while grieving. It's in the way Lavena's father had to request her autopsy photos with a Freedom of Information Act, only to find that her body told a completely different story than the Army did. It's in how Shadow warned her chain of command about her abuser, and no one listened. It's in how Gregory was labeled AWOL, abandoned by the very system he served, until his body was found 10 minutes from base. It's in how Devin went missing in his own barracks, and the Army said nothing for 31 days. And it's in how Corey drowned without water in his lungs, and somehow wasn't found for weeks in a lake that had already been searched. These aren't accidents. They're consequences. Consequences of a culture that moves faster to protect its image than its own soldiers. And if you're thinking this doesn't affect you, think again. These are the people trained to protect the country. If they can't even be protected on their own bases, what does that say about the system we trust to protect us? It's not just a military problem. It's a moral one. Because when we let institutions decide who matters and who can be quietly filed away, we all lose. So, what can be done? Tell their stories. Speak their names. Refuse the silence. Because silence is what the system counts on. It's what lets the next soldier vanish and the next family get told, it's complicated. But the truth? The truth isn't complicated. It's just inconvenient. And if we let inconvenience win, then these soldiers didn't just vanish, they were erased. And the ones who erased them? They're still holding the pen. Watch the next video on your screen now to keep going down this rabbit hole. And if you believe these stories need to be heard, hit subscribe so we never let them fade into silence again. Let's go back to Lavena Johnson. She was the first story we talked about, but maybe you didn't catch the part that makes it stick in your throat. It wasn't just that she died. It's the fact that her death looked like a cover story written by amateurs, and yet it worked. Lavena was found in a contractor's tent. The official line? Suicide. But she had a broken nose, a black eye, loose teeth, and acid burns. Her body had bruising consistent with assault. A bloody trail led away from her like someone had dragged her. The military told her father she had shot herself with her M16 rifle, a weapon nearly as tall as she was while seated. The wound pattern didn't match, the physics didn't make sense, so her father requested the photos. When they arrived, the photos were horrifying. Lavena's lips were split open. One of her teeth was missing. There was a bite mark on her hand. And the burn marks? Strong evidence someone tried to destroy DNA evidence, likely sexual assault. And yet, the Army doubled down. Suicide. No DNA testing, no rape kit, no fingerprints taken from the weapon, no interviews released. Just one word: closed. Now imagine that was your daughter. You raised her. You watched her swear into service. You sent her care packages overseas. You prayed she'd come home safe. Then you get a phone call that says she died by her own hand. And you're supposed to just accept that? Her father didn't. He turned into a one-man press machine, appearing on talk shows, calling congressmen, writing letters, pushing for an independent investigation. He got traction, but never justice. The case remains unchanged, still labeled self-inflicted gunshot wound. And Lavena remains buried not just beneath the soil, but beneath the weight of institutional denial. Now think about that the next time someone says, the system works. Because when the system wants to bury something, it digs fast. Gregory Wedel-Morales knew that too, though he never lived to understand how deep that hole went. His mother, Kim, had to beg for anyone to listen. She drove to Fort Hood, called the MPs, filed missing persons reports, hung flyers, called his friends, begged the army to track his phone or scan cameras. Nothing. They told her Gregory had left on his own. AWOL. Case closed. They said he probably ran off, maybe got into trouble, maybe didn't want to be found. But Gregory was planning a wedding. He had a job lined up. He had just made plans to move home to Oklahoma. He wasn't hiding. He was gone. For 10 months, no updates. Then, on the 19th of June, 2020, a construction crew found human remains in a field about 4 miles from the base. It was him, skeletal, badly decomposed, nothing left but clothing scraps and dental records. The spot had already been searched months earlier, thoroughly. So how did his body show up there suddenly? No answer. The army offered condolences, then updated his status posthumously. But Gregory's family? Still waiting for the full truth. The military classified it as a cold case. No foul play confirmed, no timeline established, no leads made public. But the message was clear. The moment Gregory missed formation, he was no longer their problem. Only after he became a headline did he become a human being again. That's not how this is supposed to work. When a soldier goes missing, it should trigger alarms, not paperwork. Which brings us to Vanessa Guillen. Her case made headlines, but what most people forget is that if the public hadn't forced the Army's hand, she'd be another name on a forgotten list. She told her family she was being harassed by a fellow soldier. She didn't name him, not directly, but her behavior changed. She withdrew. She became fearful. She stopped leaving her room except for duty, and she stopped smiling in photos. On the 22nd of April, 2020, Vanessa was last seen in the armory room at Fort Hood. She vanished. Her keys, her ID, her debit card, all found in her locker. Surveillance cameras showed nothing. The Army waited 24 hours. Then 48. Then longer. They didn't tell her family she was missing for days. When her mother pushed for answers, they gave her vague responses. She probably went AWOL. Give it time. She'll show up. She didn't. 2 months passed. Then, on the 30th of June, her remains were discovered near the Leon River, dismembered, buried in concrete. The soldier who killed her specialist, Aaron David Robinson, had bludgeoned her to death with a hammer in the armory room. He then had his girlfriend help him hide the body, return to base, and pretend nothing happened. Robinson wasn't arrested until after the discovery. And when police tried to take him in, he shot himself before they could cuff him. He died without facing trial. And the military? They responded by finally admitting there had been a failure of leadership. No kidding. Vanessa's death shook the public. Protests erupted. Her name was printed on shirts. Celebrities posted about her. Lawmakers drafted the I Am Vanessa Guillen Act to reform how sexual harassment cases were handled in the military. But the real question still hangs in the air. Why did it take public outrage to spark action? Why did a family have to go to the media and not military command to be heard? Why do so many other names never reach that level of attention? You see the pattern yet? Lavena, ignored. Shadow, dismissed. Gregory, labeled AWOL. Devin, quietly classified. Corey, found too late. Vanessa, covered up until people screamed. This isn't random. It's the architecture of silence. A well-oiled machine designed to delay, deflect, and disappear the uncomfortable. And unless someone lights a fire under it, nothing moves. Not justice, not accountability, not change. Only families left behind move. They move through grief, through anger, through bureaucracy. They bury children and carry binders full of unanswered questions. They hold press conferences in parking lots. They organize candlelight vigils and wear t-shirts with hashtags on them. And all the while, the institution keeps its doors locked and its lips tighter. And maybe you're wondering, why? Why would they hide these things? Because the military is built on control. Control of information, control of optics, control of narrative. If a soldier dies overseas, they're a hero. If a soldier dies at home under suspicious circumstances, they're a liability. And that liability has to be contained. Downplay it, discredit it, delay it, until people move on, until the media forgets, until the family gives up. But some don't. And when they don't, when they refuse to be quiet, when they shout loud enough sometimes, the cracks show. Sometimes, the silence breaks. And when it does, the truth slips out just for a second, just long enough for the rest of us to see that maybe this isn't about one bad base, or one violent soldier, or one unlucky moment. Maybe it's about a system that knows how to protect its secrets more than its people. And maybe it's time we stop letting them get away with it. It's easy to think these families are chasing ghosts, that they're clinging to conspiracy theories because they can't accept the truth. But that's not what's happening here. What they're chasing isn't fantasy, it's basic decency. They want what any parent, spouse, or sibling would want. Answers that make sense. Not vague statements. Not redacted reports. Not pre-packaged lies dressed up as findings. Just the truth. But the military machine is not built to admit failure. It's built to maintain control, even if that means denying reality. You see it in how they respond to press inquiries. You see it in the non-answers, the no-comment quotes, the half-hearted promises that vanish the minute a headline fades. And you really see it when grieving families are treated like a PR problem instead of people. Shadow McClaine's mom was told to let the process play out. What process? The one where her daughter's killer was allowed to keep serving for months after the murder? The one where warning signs were ignored? The one where a soldier's disappearance wasn't even investigated until bones were found? That's not a process. That's a cover. That's what happens when a system values silence over safety. And it doesn't stop at Fort Hood, or Fort Bragg, or Joint Base Lewis McChord. It happens across the country, in big bases, small ones, active duty, reserves. Because the problem isn't location. It's culture. A culture that turns every mysterious death into a whisper, a side note, a shrug. And that culture has a cost. Every time the military brushes off a soldier's disappearance, it sends a message. Your life is less important than our image. Every time a family is told stop pushing, it tells the next one, don't ask too many questions. And every time a body is found in a place that was already searched, it shows you exactly how much effort is really being made. Now, here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. It could happen again, and it probably will. There's nothing stopping it. No watchdog with real teeth. No policy with real power. No accountability that survives the news cycle. The I Am Vanessa Guillen Act was a start, but only a start. Because new policies don't change old habits, and they don't erase decades of denial. For every Vanessa that got attention, there are 5 other names you've never heard. And if you're thinking, that can't be right, we would have heard about it, just ask yourself one question. Who decides what we hear? Not the families, not the soldiers, not even the commanders on the ground. It's a machine, and it decides what to show you, when to show it, and how fast to bury it. And sometimes, it buries it so well that even the families start to wonder if they imagined it. One father, a Navy vet, said it felt like grieving in an empty room. I kept yelling and yelling, but all I heard was my own voice bouncing off the walls. That's what it means to lose a child in silence. It's not just grief. It's grief inside a vacuum. No closure, no truth, no answers. Just a folded flag and the hollow thud of a door closing behind you. And that's the final wound, the way these families are treated, like they're asking for too much. They're not asking for lawsuits. They're not asking for revenge. They're asking for one thing. Don't let their child's death be forgotten. Don't let the story get buried just because it's uncomfortable. Don't pretend everything's fine when the evidence is screaming that it's not. And for that, they're labeled troublemakers. They get ghosted by media outlets, dismissed by officials, blocked by red tape, told that their fight is over. But it's not over. Not even close. Because the fight isn't just for their child anymore. It's for every soldier still walking into that machine, still believing the promise that if they serve honorably, they'll be protected. And until that promise is actually honored, then the system stays broken, and silence keeps winning. But it doesn't have to. Not if people start paying attention. Not if we stop letting headlines fade the minute another story drops. Not if we say, no more. Not one more soldier disappeared without a proper search. Not one more death labeled non-suspicious when the evidence says otherwise. Not one more family told to move on. You know what moving on really means in these cases? It means giving up. It means swallowing the pain and pretending it's closure. It means accepting a story that doesn't add up just because no one wants to reopen the file. But these families, they didn't sign up for that. And their kids didn't either. These were people who volunteered, who put on the uniform, who said, I'm willing to give my life if necessary. But they didn't expect it to be taken quietly, or explained away, or ignored. And they sure as hell didn't expect the enemy to be inside the gates. But sometimes it is. Sometimes the real danger isn't bullets or bombs or foreign threats. It's neglect. It's indifference. It's the quiet rot inside the structure. The parts nobody audits. The officers nobody questions. The reports nobody checks. That's the real battlefield. And right now, it's winning. The military calls it honorably discharged. But for too many soldiers, the real discharge happens the moment they disappear. The moment their name stops being useful. The moment their file gets locked in a drawer and their picture taken down from the bulletin board. Gone. And with every unanswered question, every stalled report, every shrug from command, it's like they die a second death. A quieter one. A death by forgetting. And what do? We move on. We let the media cycle chew it up and spit it out. We let hashtags burn out. We tell ourselves it was probably just an isolated case. That there must be more to the story. But that's the trap. That's how silence wins. Not with force, with fatigue. It waits. It waits for us to stop caring. It waits for the families to run out of money, or energy, or time. It waits for the headlines to fade. And then it takes another, and another, and another. Because the truth is, silence doesn't need to hide. It just needs to outlast you. It doesn't have to explain itself. It doesn't have to justify the inconsistencies or answer the hard questions. It just has to wait until no one's listening anymore. And that's when the system breathes easy. That's when it files the case away permanently. Until it happens again. And someone else has to start the same fight from zero. A mother making phone calls at midnight because her son didn't check in. A father who used to salute the flag, now questioning what it really stands for. A sister crying in a parking lot because the army won't release the autopsy. A spouse sitting at a funeral wondering how you accidentally shoot yourself with someone else's weapon. It's not just tragic. It's exhausting. It's emotionally bankrupt. And it's unacceptable. But it's also fixable. If you're still watching this video right now, it means you care. And that matters. Because silence only works when people stop looking. And you're still looking. You're still asking questions. You're still pulling at the threads they hoped would stay buried. So let's be clear about what this video is really about. It's not just 5 missing soldiers. It's not just Fort Hood, or Fort Bragg, or the Pacific Northwest. It's not even just about the military. It's about a culture that punishes curiosity, that rewards obedience over accountability, that sees every whistleblower as a threat and every grieving parent as a problem. And if we don't talk about it, if we let them keep calling these cases unfortunate, or inconclusive, or outside our jurisdiction, then we're helping them bury the truth. And one day, someone we love might be the one who doesn't come home. Someone like Lavena, or Gregory, or Shadow, or Devin, or Corey, or Vanessa. Names we know now but almost didn't, because silence tried to erase them, and it almost worked. Almost, but not quite. Because their families refused to go away. They refused to sit down. They refused to sign the dotted line that says, "Case closed." And now it's our job to make sure those names stay alive louder than ever. Because the system may not be listening, but people are. You are. And that's where change begins. If this video made you feel something, don't let it stop here. Hit subscribe and keep the pressure alive, because the next video on your screen might be the one they really don't want you to see.